Hello, it's author Tonya Duncan Ellis with another episode of Write This, my author interview show. And this month, not only is it Black History Month, which I've been celebrating and enjoying for the past couple of weeks, but it's also International Friendship Month. And in honor of that, I have welcomed on author Jessica Speer, a nonfiction author who wrote a book for tweens and upper elementary school age girls about navigating friendships. And Miss Speer has a master in social sciences, so she has a lot of expertise to share in the subject matter. And I'm really excited to pick her brain and talk about navigating relationships. I read her book this weekend and it was very enlightening. So without further ado, let's welcome her on. I see her here. Let's see. Get this on here. Okay, hey, Jessica, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. I've been having a great week, and I've been looking forward to speaking with you about your book.
Likewise, I loved your book too. So there's so many parallels, with my book and your Sophie book. So I'm excited to dive right in and talk about friendship, and especially friendships in books and how that works out.
Right. Your book really dovetailed perfectly with mine because even my book, my BFF, talks about how their friendships kind of up and down like a roller coaster. And that's even how you started your book. So it really goes hand in hand with all of these issues that young girls faced.
Yes, so true. And I loved, the things that kept happening in the friendship that you were illustrating with Sophie, where, she kind of felt forced to go on that roller coaster ride and that was uncomfortable. And then, her friend Chloe kind of stole some of her work at school. And so you could kind of see this escalating issue with them that I loved how you brought that to light, because that's so common. That happens all the time, especially for preteen girls.
Right. And you really expertly display all of these things that girls and really women and all, even adults go through, sadly, if we don't gain that emotional maturity or learn things that you're teaching in your books to help us navigate any relationship.
Yeah, it's a learned skill. And I think sometimes we don't realize that as parents or teachers or caregivers. Kids learn how to respond in healthy ways by being, taught how to respond in healthy ways. So it's a skill that we pick up over time. So in my book, I dive into what those skills are, and I loved in your, fiction approach, the girls in your book, they show some really healthy skills over time, so I love that too. You're kind of demonstrating both sides and showing how it works out. So it's fun that in books we get to explore and help kids see, different ways to navigate this. And so the more resources they have, the better.
I know. And really, we need to go on tour together. I need to come down to you. Go on tour. Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? And give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I'm in Colorado, and I started writing for kids about 10 years ago, but mostly inspired by my kids. But what drew me to that as well is I have a background in social sciences. So I've always been really interested in human relationships. I mean, that's the thing that, keeps me intrigued by things. And so before I even wrote my book, BFF or NRF, Not Really Friends, looks like this. Before I wrote this, I was running a friendship program for girls in schools and boys. Actually, I had boys as well, but that's a different book. And it's in my head still. But so out of that friendship program, grew this book. And, I loved that process so much of, researching and writing that I just submitted my third book to my publisher. Everything I'm doing so far is nonfiction related to social emotional topics for kids, because I love that. For me, that's kind of what gets me so excited and gets me writing.
And that's so needed. And you didn't mention it, but you actually have a master's degree in social sciences. So she's not only interested in it, she has studied and had plenty of expertise in the subject matter. And what really struck me too when I was reading your book is when we look at us being in this digital age, it's even more important, I think, for parents to work with kids on these skills, because it's harder for them even to communicate. The way they're growing up is so different than when we grew up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially with a pandemic, kids are out of practice. So we need to
Right.
recognize that. Some of the kids were at that, early elementary school age where they're picking up so many skills, and then we have a large break in time where they didn't get to practice, their social skills as they would have had in a setting, at school. So kids are at different levels right now as to how they're doing socially and emotionally. So that's where we can step in as caregivers and give them the books they might need, or have the conversations over the dinner table they might need to help them kind of just, get back into this. Let's all get back into this, in-person social world together, because it really is skills based. I like to talk about it with kids and families as a growth mindset. So these are all skills that we learn and then we get better at over time with practice. So yeah, my book is filled with quizzes to first identify like how are our friendship skills, and then maybe how healthy are our friendships. So I love tools where kids can self-reflect and see, where their strengths are and weaknesses are, because we all have them, and I love in your book too, we could clearly see the strengths and the weaknesses of your characters, and then how they grew to overcome that over time.
Right, right. Now, what are some common issues you see with kids and friendships? Some common problems that you see?
And I keep going back to your book. So one of the things I see is often what's happening underneath the surface is somebody in the friendship might be struggling with something that they don't even know they're struggling with. So I'm going to use your book as an example. So
Mhm.
Sophie's friend Chloe is struggling with some things internally. You could see that, she's overcoming her dyslexia. She's maybe a little jealous of her friend who is, strong in other ways. So she's kind of feeling, not so great herself. And so sometimes when we're not feeling our best ourselves, that starts to show up in our friendships. So that is one thing that we see common. So, we as teachers and parents and caregivers and writers can remember that, when someone is behaving in a way, that's not really reflective of who they are. It's kind of what their internal struggle is. And we're seeing that in their behavior. So that's super important to remember. Another tricky thing, I think, is starting in like late elementary and into middle school. Friendships really shift for kids. So it's,
Mhm.
when they're younger, it's really based on play. So they're coming together for the purpose of play. Then later, once they start puberty, and they all start this at a different stage, but they start to look for different things in their friendship. So it's not necessarily about play. It's more
Mhm.
about shared interests. It's more about, different levels of acceptance. So we can see friendships changing based on that. A real simple example is, say you have two friends and one of them is way into, boys and crushes, and the other one isn't at all. And that actually can be such a divide that for
Right.
a period of time, they might not have a lot to connect on, so
Mhm.
that's okay. So I would also encourage, families to know that, friendships do have kind of life cycles. And, sometimes friends may grow apart for a little while because their interests are changed, and maybe they'll come back together. So just
Mhm.
seeing this as, friendships are really fluid and changing, especially in the preteen and the teen years. That more than any other stage in life, there's a lot of transitions going on in friendships as kids kind of grow into themselves and start to discover their identity and what their interests are.
Mhm. Well, I really liked how you wrote this nonfiction book in such a simple way, but you covered all these concepts in a really accessible way for kids. So, can you talk a little bit about your process, or how did you go about writing the book and planning this out?
Yeah. And so for anybody who's interested in kind of nonfiction stuff, or interactive stuff, I think what I find is, I remember so clearly being this age, and what I loved, and what I have two daughters, two young daughters, and what they love too are quizzes, fun
Mhm.
quizzes and activities and fill in the blanks. And so, especially when we're talking about harder stuff, I love to throw that in there, because
Right.
by going through a quiz or by, reading a story, where you get to finish the ending or something like that, it really pulls them in, and it offers them a chance to do a lot of self-reflection. And that's where we often grow. And we're, taking the time to pause and self-reflect, we can grow from that. So what I was trying to do with this book is really, I dive deep into all sorts of topics, but do it in a way that's fun and accessible, so there's lots of color and there's big fonts and activities, and that just makes it fun, makes it kids want to pick up that book, because it pulls them right into those activities.
Now, do you use that? You mentioned earlier that you were facilitating a group for kids. Do you use your books with groups with the kids and things like that?
Absolutely. And this book grew out of that program. But, I kind of go back and forth. For my process, kids are my litmus test. They're the ones that tell me whether this is on or off. So, for this book, I was lucky enough to run a friendship program for a few years. And so the quizzes in this book, I really refined working with kids. So
Right.
I had lots of time to, fine tune those to a place where I felt like they were ready for a broader audience in a book. So that's just that's my process. I feel like I get the best feedback when I'm working directly with kids, and they help me know what's on and what's off a little bit. Yeah. What about you? I know, so you write a lot about this topic too, but in fiction, how do you do that? How do you make sure that what you're writing, really connects?
It's kind of the same thing. I have three kids, and now two of them are young adults, one's the older teen. But I started writing my series when they were in the tween age, and I would actually read them to them as bedtime stories, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, add more action." Yeah, a kid wouldn't talk like that, with the dialogue. And then some of my storylines actually are inspired by things that they did or things I would see with them. And I used to be a Sunday school teacher. So things I would see I was around kids all the time like you. So, just things they say and do inspire you, or issues that they're facing that you're
Hmm.
recognizing.
Yes, so true. So yeah, for the writers out there, the more time you could spend just observing or chatting with kids, they're so full of ideas. And so a lot of the stories in my book were stories I was hearing over and over again from, running groups of girls. So yeah, it definitely was so helpful in shaping my book from start to finish.
Right. And even if when you're in the car with them, listening to them talk to each
Hmm.
other or friends, and just things they're talking about can help inspire you.
Yes, and my daughters are teenagers now, and I still have them. When I'm getting ready to have a final version of something, they're my in-house editors. So I always have them read it first, and they tell me where I'm off. So yeah, it's so wonderful to have these resources as writers, because kids are our audience, and so we need to know exactly what they think.
And actually, as you mentioned this, really with this book, My BFF, in it, there is plagiarism. One of the Chloe, the friend,
Hmm.
plagiarizes and gets the main character to do something wrong. And my son actually gave me the idea for that. So that's true, because I actually sat down with him, because I have 12 books in my series. And I'm like, what problem can they have now? I've had every
Hmm.
problem a kid could have. So what? And he was like, what about if they're copying each other's schoolwork or something like that? So they
Yeah, and
are
I
a great
love that.
resource for a children's author.
Oh yeah, and I love that you touch that, because I feel like I know your characters are in sixth grade, and in middle school, that is really a thing. That starts to be much more of a thing than elementary school, where kids are peer pressured into doing things like that. So, and it might be the first time they've been peer pressured to do that particular thing. So it's, I love that you went there, because it gives kids a chance to think through that scenario, so that when they're in that scenario, they might know how to respond to that. So yeah, I love that you went there, because that's such a common thing in middle school. In fact, sometimes in middle school, it becomes cool to not appear smart. It's cool to not like school. So a lot of
Right,
kids
right.
feel this pressure to not do well in school or to not like school. It's just pressure they're feeling from their peers. So I love that you have a character that's, dealing with that directly, and then the truth comes out and it gets resolved. So I love that you touched on that.
Now, I connected with you through a picture book group that I'm a member of. So are you writing picture books now, or how's that come about?
I started writing picture books. I don't know if you did this too, Tonya, but when I first started writing 10 years ago, I actually started with picture books. So I have a bunch of picture books that I
What?
I just really need to kind of get back to and clean them up and finish them. And it's been on my list of things to do, was to join 12 by 12, which is a 12 picture books in 12 months group, if anybody's interested in something like that. But so my thought is to get back to that, because I do have picture books, but so far I've just been a little more successful in getting my middle grades out in the world. What about you? Are you writing picture books too?
Yes, I am. And well, this is, I started out with middle grade, and then I saw some other authors who were in 12 by 12, and I became interested in picture books. And then Judy Headland, the leader of the 12 by 12 group, this summer I was listening to little videos she had out. And I just started learning. I'm like, I want to write. You know what else happened? I went to a writers conference, and Kelly Starling Lyons, who writes beautiful picture books, she had us all in tears. We were on
Wow.
Zoom, and I was like, oh, I was just embarrassed on Zoom. Her books are so beautiful. And I said, I want to write something like that. I want to write beautiful books like that just make you feel. And so after I
Yes.
saw that, I just really started reading all her books and learning all I could about it. And then I heard other authors in 12 by 12. So that's why I joined this year.
Yeah, it's a different art form. I love it. It's so challenging to see, can you tell a story that really hits the heart in less than 500 words? So I'm
Right.
still learning that process. But it's really fun to try, and just to see if you can find something that really, hits home in such a short amount of words. And I love the collaboration with the art and picture books, where half the story is told in the artwork. So I love that too. And your book has beautiful illustrations. So tell me about that process for you and the illustrations in your books.
Well, my illustrator is actually based in India. He is a friend of mine had produced some comic books, and the first iteration of my series, I had a local author. An illustrator in Houston area that I live. That's where I live. An artist had made my first cover, but she wasn't available to do the next book when I started on that. And then my friend had these fabulous illustrations for their comic books from this person in India. And so I said, his name's Michael Ruengold. And I was like, I was kind of afraid, like, oh, they're in India. But I sent the third book in my series, Things You Didn't Know About Sophie. I sent him my instructions, and they were gorgeous. And
That's
I
wonderful.
loved them. And I just had him redo all of the books, and I've been working with him ever since. And I've never spoken to him.
Wow. I love
It's
that. That is so great that you can connect, and they're beautiful illustrations. And I feel like for that age group, it's so important. And there's illustrations in, my middle grade books too. And I love that. I feel like it can add so much to the information if there are some illustrations to go along with it.
And yours are really perfect to me. They're like that school style, and the informal writing, and just the way you have it, they're just the right length. The book I read, my BFF NRF,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really good, and it's teaching things. But really, for me as an adult, I'm serious, Jessica, it helped me, navigate or gives tools even for an adult.
Yeah, and me too. I feel like it's so easy to get on autopilot in our relationships. It really is. So for me writing it, it always feels, really like a catharsis because I get to, rethink about all these skills that we get rusty at. We're human. We forget how to communicate in healthy ways. We sometimes forget how to, manage our emotions in healthy ways. So, by writing about it, I get the awesome, benefit of being reminded of this stuff all the time. And then, for my kids, I love it because they're editing my books and, they then get reminded too. So it's a great way in my family to kind of keep some of these skills at the surface level. So we remember to do them because, we are human. Relationships are hard and we're all learning as we go.
Now, one question just popped in my head too is why is it seems that a lot of these things are more to the front with females. Then, of course, males need to learn relationship skills as well, but you see more of these kind of little issues with girls and especially in that tween age group. But why is that?
Well, and I think there's two things going on. And I actually, when I was running my friendship groups, I did have boys and I loved it when they came. But to get the boys involved was a lot harder, so the girls would, come in droves and be part of my group. And the boys, that sometimes their teachers would recommend them for the program, but it was hard to get them in. So I think one thing that's going on is we as a society still aren't acknowledging, that boys need some support in this area too. Okay. And the other thing is, for my book, I was hearing slightly different stories from boys and girls. So I do want to write another book, that's either just for boys or for everybody. That's kind of circling in my head, especially this week, because I don't want to leave boys out. I feel like they need to talk about this stuff too. And there certainly are things going on in boy world too. Sometimes it starts earlier for girls because girls hit puberty earlier. But my second book, which is coming out this summer, it's coming out in August. It's called Middle School Safety Goggles Advised. And in that book, what I try to do is make it open to all genders. So whenever possible, I didn't attribute, any pronouns. I didn't attribute any names to quotes. So what I tried to do in that book is really kind of open the door to everybody. So I'm excited about that. That comes out next summer.
And speaking of names to quotes, you have a lot of great examples in your book that people can use, look at those examples and kind of relate them to their own issues or things going on in their own lives. So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I use a lot of quotes and stories because I find that, as you do too in your writing, when we can see ourselves or experiences we've had in either stories or quotes, it really connects us to the book. So I try to do that as much as possible. And the majority of those quotes in my book came directly from my friendship program. So things I heard, girls say, and of course, to protect privacy, I always, change names, but, those quotes end up right in the book. And because I know girls, they relate to that. We've all experienced, a variety of these things over the courses of our lives.
Now, how did the people in the program relate to or how did they react after you had this book?
It's so funny is the book came out in this last August. And so I wrote the book, well before the pandemic. I think I wrote the book in 2015 or 16. I sold it to a publisher in 2018. It was supposed to come out in 2020, but it got pushed, because of the pandemic. So by this point, the girls that were in my program are so much older, which is kind of fun. So some of the girls I know, I've given them some copies of the book, because they were, along with me in the very early process. But what's fun is they are so much older now. So they would have been about 9 or 10, when I knew them. And so now, gosh, let's see, they are well into their teen years, so things change. And it takes, as it takes a really long time to bring a book into the world.
I know. And that's it. But it's just phenomenal when you look. You started out just working in that program, and now you've created kind of like a little movement with your book and all that you're doing. So kudos to you for doing this. And it's
No,
something
thank
so
you.
needed.
Well, thank you. You too. I mean, that's what we're all doing, right? We're all just kind of in our very own way, diving into our passions and somehow, giving them life and energy. So thank you. We're all doing that. That's kind of why we're writers. That's kind of why we do what we do.
Right. And this, I feel like, even for myself, you're an inspiration to kind of look when you're looking for things to write or what you want to write about. Look at what you're doing, what you're passionate about, because you've kind of taken something that was in your heart that you wanted to help kids and just expanded on that with your books.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think I started off like with a really clear direction, like I'm going to do this, this, and this. That's not how it
Right.
went at all. I just started kind of following my curiosity, which, to start was like, hey, girls have a really hard time in their friendships. What is that all about? So I dove into research that grew into the friendship program, that grew into the book. And now, this book grew into 2 other middle grade books. So I
Mm.
think you just kind of keep following your curiosity. That's all you can do. Don't worry about like mapping out your life plan. Just
Right.
keep following the things that really inspire you. And I know when I'm on to something, when I'm just excited to work on it anytime. Like, on the weekends, I'll duck into my office and, spend a little time because I'm so excited to do it. So I feel so grateful that I found something that I'm really excited to do. Do you feel that same way, Tonya, about your writing?
I really do, yeah. And I see some other authors on here. There's one author, Michaela, that's from Atlanta. She's passionate. She's a mom with she has a book called Little Mr. Fix It. And it was where her son working with her husband, building things. And then she's passionate about promoting that with an African American father helping the son. And a lot of the
Love
authors I
it.
see in this author space are taking their passions and the things that they find important, and using that to help people. So it's just wonderful to see.
I love that idea. I love that. Good job.
Yeah. And
Excellent.
like you said, it all kind of falls into place. So
Yeah.
that is really a true blessing to work hard on the things that you're passionate about and see them, the little steps, things you didn't even imagine opening up for you. So that's been wonderful to see. Because have you been on any TV shows or anything like that with your book?
Just like maybe some news interviews. So
Right, because I
I
could
did a
see
little.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so just talking about, because I think what I'm lucky with this topic is it's kind of evergreen topic. This is something that generation after generation, it's just one of those things that's tricky in life. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
lucky enough that I'm writing on a subject that is kind of evergreen, and I think that's one thing that was really my publisher was drawn to, it, that this is a book that has a lot of shelf life because everybody hits these preteen and teen years where friendships get a little tricky. So that's been really fun, and it's fun to see, when you get, and you've experienced this too, I'm sure, when you get the book out there, it's fun to see it take on a life of its own. Things you didn't
Right.
even expect. That like a mom book group would be doing this because they had a lot of stuff to talk about themselves with, friendships and memories of their early years. So it's fun to see just what happens when you put it out there. It kind of gets a little life of its own.
Right, right. And then that's good when you're choosing your topic. Of course, you chose something from the heart, but choosing something that is going to be evergreen and that will attract readers and can help broad groups of people is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what I loved that you did so beautifully in your book, so when we're talking about like picture books and middle grade, one thing that is important for writers to do is kind of make it all come together at the end so that, the reader walks away feeling pretty good. YA is a totally different story. So to YA, you can end things in a totally different way because, the
Mhm.
readers are more emotionally prepared to do that. But, for middle grade and younger, it's nice that things kind of they come together, and so the reader feels after they've read the story that they're like, oh, okay, good. And I loved how you did that because
Mhm.
where your story did that so well is when the friend who was not really being a friend, um, at the end of the book, she owned that. She owned her mistake, and
Mhm.
that repaired the friendship. And I
Mhm.
love that because that's a piece that often doesn't happen in the real world. And maybe there's something going on, and somebody doesn't own their part of it, and it causes this, this rift in the friendship or the relationship that then festers, so I
Right.
love that you did that, Tonya, that you, there was a lot of conflict, but then at the end, they resolved it, and she owned it, and she apologized, and the friendship was repaired, and they were able to move forward. So I love that you did that, and that's so important for middle grade books.
Right. And they lived happily ever after. So.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And until the next bump in the road.
Yeah, until the next book with more drama with them. And actually, I'm writing on about them, and my newest book has them having more drama in the friendship. So
good.
It moves
Good.
on. It moves on. Well, Jessica,
Yeah.
I'm so happy that we got to have this conversation. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. So the easiest place to find me is my website, which is Jessica Speer, SPEER.com. And that has links to all my socials. It has information about my books. You can sign up for an e-newsletter if you want to hear more about I write a lot about friendship and relationships and, connection and family. So yeah, my website's the easiest place to find me, or here on Instagram. And Tonya, thank you for all that you do. I love what you're writing. I love this community you're creating. So hats off to you for everything that you're putting out there too.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. I love doing it. I love talking to different authors and just learning about their process and inspiration. So that's really, I'm learning a lot by doing this too, and I'm happy to share the information with other authors.
Good,
That's
good.
good.
Well, pleasure to chat with you today.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and hope you can come back next week for another episode of Write This. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.